one thing that I think is very important and underrated as a way to implement and understand LOA principles better is to take a break reading certain teachers and take a break listening to certain teachers from time to time. And what I mean by that is there are so many people you see who become obsessed by a certain teacher or teaching when it comes to this LOA stuff. For instance, Neville, Abraham Hicks, certain YouTube personalities, whatever it may be. People get really into certain teachers and teachings. And then they have a hard time stepping away from them. They don't allow themselves to not listen to that teacher for a couple weeks, let alone a couple months. And what I've found over the years is there's usually a huge benefit from taking breaks to listening to the same teacher every day. You're going to appreciate that teacher more if you take a break for a couple weeks or a couple months and then come back to them. And in the meantime, just do your own thing, or listen to other teachers, other teachings, other people talking about this stuff. Because if you just listen to one teacher, or constantly listen to one teacher over and over again, it limits you. It limits you when these principles are meant to be limitless. And I see it all the time. That's why I kind of harp on this point. I've again been pretty active on the Neville subreddit recently. And that place is a freaking mess because people have put a teacher on a pedestal and they are unwilling to look at other avenues and ways of applying this information. Not everybody on there, don't get me wrong, obviously. But there's so many people on there that only will listen to Neville's advice. And that's a terrible way to try to apply these principles unless Neville's advice is working incredibly well for you, which, it's not for most people. But it's not just Neville. This goes for anybody. Any LOA teacher. I have taken breaks from all the LOA teachers I love for months at a time. The one exception to that, the one person that I've never taken a long break from is Kuei. And that's just because Kuei is so practical and there's so much common sense, such a lack of spiritual language and unnecessary woo-woo stuff that I've found I've never had to take a big break from reading his advice. So maybe a month or so is the longest I've gone. Maybe a little bit longer before I've gone back to reading Kuei. I feel like Kuei is safe to read constantly, almost every day. But there's no other LOA teacher that I would say you should read every day. You want to take long breaks with some of these folks. I mentioned it in the podcast before, like Joseph Murphy, I took like a break, didn't read his stuff for probably over a year, 2 years, came back, it was a totally different thing, so much better. H. Emily Cady, as much as I love her, I go months without ever looking at her stuff. And she's one of my favorite LOA teachers. Richard Dotz, I love him, but there's been many times where I haven't looked at any of his advice for months on end. And definitely Neville. These days I hardly, I don't look at much Neville advice because I saturated myself early on, and I see how toxic it is to follow just his advice and go down that rabbit hole. I've seen that firsthand on that Reddit page. And I know it's the same for people who follow like Abraham Hicks and the other big LOA people. I hope this sounds like common sense. I'm all about common sense when it comes to trying to apply this stuff. And I almost hope too that it's like, you're kind of like, no shit, Tim, this is so obvious. Like, why are you making this video? If that's your reaction, it's like, well, that's why. This is like, no shit, Tim advice. Like, just common sense, you know. So yeah, thought I would share this with you, with everybody, and I hope that it was helpful.